It is 9 a.m. on the 25th of May. We have just completed the meeting of the Board of Health, and we move into council time. Are there, for old business, any motions relative to the minutes for May 18?
Move to approve.
Thank you. A second?
Yes, I did.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, is all those in favor of passing the minutes for May 18 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It is unanimous. Next, we move to the vacant buildable lands model. Kathleen?
Thank you, Chair. I can start out. So this vacant buildable land model has been in the works for a couple of years now, as the council knows, and is going to be before the council and the public during a public hearing on June 7th. Just to make sure that we're fully prepared for that, this is a time for discussion with the council. If there's any feedback or direction to staff or further questions, so that we can be fully prepared to put this out for the public's input on June 7th. I know our team is on, Chris Cook, Bob Poole, Jose, and Oliver, and they are here to answer questions and discuss any direction council would like to provide.
Are there any comments from council?
I have a question, Chair.
Councilor Rylander?
Just to be clear, am I correct in understanding that the buildable lands model addresses land which is within the urban growth areas, or specifically, and that lands that are outside of that are not included in the model?
Councillors, this is Oliver. Yes, that's correct. Land outside the urban growth boundary, the statute just calls for collection of data in terms of the level of building activity, building permit, septic systems. That's all that is required or called for outside of the urban growth area.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Other questions, comments?
Chair?
Yes, Councilor Lentz?
Yeah, thank you. So as we've been going through this process with the vacant buildable lands, excuse me, model and report, we've had a lot of conversation around some of the assumptions that are going into the model and the report. And I think that as we come up on the June 7th hearing, we should make sure that we have the strongest, most defensible report and model that we can. Accordingly, I have some suggestions I'd like to make. I can start. I can say the first one. I can frame it as a motion. I don't want to cut off any other conversation, but that's the direction that I'd like to go. So,
if we could hear the thinking first, perhaps, so that we understand a little bit more about where you're headed.
Well, I'll start with the first one then. So in the assumptions going into the vacant buildable lands model, one of the things that we discussed was density targets, whether to use achieved density or assumed density. The recommendation that I would like to make, the motion that I would like to make, is that for the model and the report moving forward, that we use achieved density as opposed to assumed density targets.
Is there a second?
Yeah, if that's a motion, I'll second it. Yeah.
And perhaps you'd like to give your reasoning, Councilor Lentz.
Through statute and regulations, we're required to use achieved density as opposed to assumed density. And the backup that we have, what we are able to defend moving forward and showing our work is achieved density. So that is why I suggest that we move in that direction.
I guess my only question is, why the motion, given that it's a requirement?
Because currently we don't have it in our model, and because the assumptions that are being used currently are assumed, not achieved density. So we need to change it in order to follow the statute.
And what would the effect of that change be as far as you know?
Well, in addition to following state law, we would actually have a stronger ability to use the buildable lands model in the way it's intended, which is to do a survey of what we have in order.
You're muted, or the sound
Then
went out.
Hmm.
Councillor Lentz, I can't hear. There we go.
Okay, I didn't show that I was muted, so thanks for letting me know. So in addition to following state law, we also would be better able to use the model for what it's intended for, which is to do a survey of where we've been and what we have, in order to then, at a later stage in the process, work on what we need and what we want. If we go with achieved density, then we will actually be able to review the density that has been achieved. For more detail than that, I would want to turn to staff as far as the benefits of achieved versus assumed density, but that's my top level, counselor level understanding.
Chair, I would appreciate staff commenting.
Councillors, this is Oliver Ojako, Community Planning Director. If I may just briefly chime in, the difference between assumed and achieved is that, as Councillor Temple Lentz was articulating, we are required by statute to look at, in the last 5 years, as we are looking back, how has we developed and what have we seen on the ground in terms of actual density? And we are required by statute to use the actual observed and achieved density in our reporting out to the state of how well we are doing, and also to use that achieved density to project out going forward. If we were to continue to develop at the achieved density, what are the how are things going to shape up going forward? And again, remember that we are looking at the decisions that have been made when the plan was adopted. Here's what we're anticipating will happen. So now we are asked to review that and see how well or how close that we are relative to those assumptions. And the report and the statute itself is very clear in the requirement to report how well you are doing and what we're observing, and based on the actual data, both from the assessor's office and the data that we are using, we have a number of the achieved density. So we have to include that in the report and send it out to meet our requirement.
But it's not clear to me, are we, Councillor Lentz, are you saying that they've been really using the assumed information rather than the achieved in the model?
Yes.
And
Question, Oliver, if you would continue kind of in response to Councillor Rylander. It seems that Vancouver City has been one of the entities that has voiced a lot of concern regarding how density is reported for them. And my question had been, what would the effect be of a change to achieve density? What would the effect be on Vancouver City and their reaction to that based on their input to date?
I I don't think this is only unique to the city of Vancouver. All the other cities are, if you look at the actual development that have occurred, they assume density for each of the smaller cities is 6, and each of the cities are seeing achieved density above that 6. So if we use the assumed density of 6 for the smaller cities when they are actually coming in above the 6, in some cases 7, 6.6, or whatever the case may be, we may be required, or they may be required to adjust going forward if that is the direction of the council. But in the case of the city of Vancouver, the achieved density will be a true reflection of what is occurring on the ground. And I think they will agree that instead of assigning 8 units to an acre overall, when they are coming in like 18, reasonably, it makes no sense to assume that you are coming in at 8 when you are really seeing 18 on the ground. So it is a true reality of what is happening. And I think that's what the state statute require us to report on what is happening, and then use that to project the remaining available land. If we were to continue at that, what would that capacity give us? So I think that's the benefit of using the achieved density. And I think the city of Vancouver will support that. The only question would be, because in the Vancouver UGA, what the city limits and the unincorporated portion of the Vancouver UGA, that's where we assume the 8. Now, you will agree that we are even exceeding the 8 in the unincorporated portion of the Vancouver UGA. And when you look at the city proper, they are coming in at 18. So even if you do the average, you will still be above the 8. So it makes it's not reasonable to assume a much lower number when you are actually seeing more on the ground.
Thank you. So
Madam Chair.
again, if we go back to the effect of the change, what is the effect in the report of using, say, for the city of Vancouver, 18 versus 8?
It will show that for example, that the remaining land, or however acres we said is available, if you use 8 versus the 18, 8 will get you much lower capacity in terms of what is available, and 18 will show you more, that you have more capacity to accommodate the population that you've already planned for. That will be the immediate effect or the numbers.
And is that more capacity? You're looking at the future there?
It is.
Can I interject, please? Sorry to interrupt you, Oliver. This is Chris Cook.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Councilor, you have asked this question before, and when you did it really caused me to stop and think. So is this a look back or a look forward? It is a look back in that what we're talking about is the capacity of what is remaining of what was planned for in the 2015-2035 comprehensive plan. So if you take the numbers and the assumptions from that time, and you look at the growth that has occurred, the achieved density since then, the question is, if you define capacity as what was assumed in that 2015 timeframe. The question is what's left. So that's what capacity means. If what was assumed in 2015 is for some reason not reflective of what is currently happening, that is a different issue.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
But Chris, isn't that what happened? We made assumptions in the 2015 model with regard to growth in Vancouver and the other cities, and that's not what happened. We didn't account for redevelopment. We didn't account for all the residential housing units that are being built on already developed land. So I think when we talk about achieved versus assumed, if we're looking at the data, the only thing we should be able to report is what actually has occurred, not what we thought was going to occur. Am I
Well, we have to,
reflective or?
yes, Counselor, yes, we have to report what has occurred. We have to compare that to what was assumed at the time
Right.
would be the capacity.
And that
That's-
doesn't mean what we're assuming for the future from today going forward. It just means what we thought was going to happen in 2015 and 2016 when we adopted the last plan.
And
clearly
when
things have changed.
that is correct.
Yep, that's correct.
So Chris or Oliver, in the report, again, just using Vancouver as an example, we see the number 18. So how is this a change? We see the achieved density. It's reported.
My understanding, and perhaps Oliver or Bob can correct me because I'm often wrong on the technical aspect here. My understanding, so first of all, this is the Buildable Lands Program, I'm quoting from the WAC, is intended to determine if urban densities are being achieved within urban growth areas by comparing local planning goals and assumptions with actual development and determining if actual development is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So if we are seeing a density, if what is being achieved is 18 and what was planned for is 6 or 8, within Vancouver it would have been 8, I guess, then according to the WAC and the statute and the Department of Commerce guidelines, what we do is we say, well, we assumed in our planning goals and our assumptions that there would be a density of 8. There's a density of 18. We determined that 8 was an urban density. Yes, we're achieving urban growth here. And then there is the requirement to measure what's left, what hasn't been built out, and see if there is still capacity based on those 2015 assumptions and numbers. And I'd like to remind the council that in June of 2021, you adopted a resolution. Well, I'm not sure if you adopted the resolution. You voted to approve certain assumptions. And one of those assumptions was that you would use these assumed capacities, 8 in Vancouver, 6 in some of the other cities, rather than the actual achieved density. And I think that Councillor Lentz's motion, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, would revise that direction from June of 2021.
So
Correct.
my question remains, given the fact that the 18 is reported for Vancouver City and other actuals are appearing in the report in columnar form and discussed and so on, how does this change the approach in the report? How does it change the effect in the report on density, on vacant buildable lands?
And I will leave that to Oliver and Jose, who are the authors of the report.
Counselor, this is Jose Alvarez. You're correct that the 18 is reported in the report. We have two charts. One shows the 18 and one shows the assumed the 8. This is really dealing with the vacant buildable lands model and whether to use the achieved density in the model. When you made your decision in June of 2021, we reverted back to the existing density targets. So that's the clarification we need. Whether we're going to go forward with the model using the achieved density, because the model is under forecasting the capacity in the city of Vancouver and the city of Ridgefield are the two biggest misses.
Thank you. Other questions from council or comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Rylander.
so if we, to your last point, Jose, if we use the achieved, then we're under projecting the reality that's going on in Vancouver and Ridgefield at this point. And that would that have a negative effect on their planning or their development efforts?
I think it just would make our model more accurate to reflect what's actually going on. So it's just improving the accuracy of the model, because we have one of the issues with the city is that we have a severe undercount. One is that the model, again, not accounting for development on commercial land, and then the density issue, and then some of the other adjustments that we made to the model, I think address most of the issues with the city, but these are a couple of the most egregious ones where there's a significant undercount.
Okay, and I want to go back to the model one more time just to make it crystal clear in my mind. Are you using in the current model or in this proposed model the achieved or the assumed?
Which model are you referring to?
The vacant buildable land model.
So right now we're using the achieved based on council's direction. What we're reporting in the report.
That's not-
Pardon me?
Not Jose.
No.
Oh, sorry.
I think
We're using-
I think the current model is using assumed per
Assumed.
council's direction in June.
Yes.
The recommendation is to move that to achieve,
Achieved,
because we
yes.
actually have the data and that's required by law.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure it's clear because it wasn't clear to me which we were really using.
Yeah, Jose, currently we are using,
That's correct, yes.
yeah.
Based on what the council direction was in June
Yes.
of 2021, which was assumed.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
Yeah, so Councilor Rylander, just to help clarify, there was the PAC report and assumptions that were recommended based on the period of time that they did their work and gathered the data. And then there was a meeting in June of 2021 where the council decided to change some of those vacant buildable lands model assumptions, and this is one of those. So rather than using achieved density, which is required by law and what actually the data showed, this council decided to use 8, which is, I believe 8, which was the assumed density, which creates an inaccuracy in the report. And it's pretty significant. So if somebody can correct me if that's muddying it up or helping clarify.
No, that's correct.
But the reality is, instead of 8, it's been closer to 18. Is that right?
Correct.
And so if we're using achieved, so if we're using achieved, we're going to use the 18 in the model instead of the 8 assumption, correct?
Correct.
So then using the achieved is potentially more accurate than using the previous assumption.
That's correct. And that is actually reporting on the actual observed development rather than reporting on assumed, which is not correct.
Thank you.
When you derived the number 8 for the assumed, specifically, how was that? How did you do that?
Councillors, if I may, those assumed densities were I think I can say that that was the assumption that was made in the last planning process, that as areas that we are bringing into the urban growth boundary and areas that are redeveloping, that we will see an average of 8 units to an acre, both multi-family and single family. Well, that was used as well as in the sizing of the urban growth boundary, not unique to Vancouver UGA, but the same for the smaller cities. Washougal, Battleground, Commerce, and Richfield were all assumed as developing at 6, with the exception of Le Centre at 4 units to an acre. And then there was no density assumption for the town of Yakov because they do not have sewer. So that was what the cities and the county at the time assume is what we are going to see. And it's only an assumption that as things actually develop on the ground, we will then see exactly how are we developing, what is occurring. And that is the basis for the review and evaluation, and then adjust your assumptions going forward, which is really the basic premise of the Buildable Lands Review and Evaluation. And that's exactly what we are doing now. Every time we do the review and evaluation and then do the report that is associated with that, we have to make an adjustment, and this is one of them. So in this case, as Councillor Olsen indicated, we reported on what have actually happened, and the Bill Pack committee reviewed that and agreed that that's really what is occurring. And, the council made a decision to continue with the assumption of 8, 6, and 4 for Vancouver and the smaller cities, which in essence is not what we are seeing on the ground. So that decisions on 8, 6, and 4 were made as part of the 2015 to 2035 planning assumption.
Okay, thank you. I think I didn't make my question clear. I know you didn't pull the number 8 out of the air, and you have a need to show your work. How did you derive the number 8 for use in this report?
Not in this report. That was the assumption that was made, that as the Vancouver UGA develops, it is based on we are anticipating that if you zone an area or plan an area for 5,000 square foot lot or 6,000 square foot lot, that you may see 6 or 7 or 5 to 6 dependent units to an acre for R16 or R17. When you get to your urban medium apartment, condominium, and townhouses, that you may see maybe 16. So on an average of maybe 5 and 16, that you may come up to 8 units an acre. That was how the assumptions were, the 8 and the 6 was arrived at. Well, what we are seeing since then is that, we're not really seeing on R16, R175, and R110, 5,000 square foot lot, 6,000 square foot lot, 7,500 square foot lot, 10,000 square foot lot, single family, or 20,000 square foot lot. When you have all that, this is based on what I've actually occurred or built on the ground. And then when you look at your medium and high density, 12 units to an acre to up to 43 units to an acre, if you combine what I've already developed and combine that with what you see on the single family side, that you may be seeing an average of 8. Well, that's not what was happening. Maybe we're off in the 2015-16 plan. And if we are off, then we are supposed to come back and correct that. And that's really what we are asking the council, what the report is showing, that if you use the actual, if you're required to report on the actual density, you have to report on actually what have occurred on the ground. It means that your previous assumptions, you were off, or that we were off.
Madam Chair.
So Oliver, I'm understanding that it was off back when the assumption was made. Why was the assumption made for 8? Was it based on so many units per acre and there were so many acres available, or that code required that it be no more than so many units per lot? What was the basis for that 8? How did you come up with that number back then?
Can I interject just briefly?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. These are good questions, Counselor. I'm not sure that, although Oliver has been, Oliver is a veteran of the comp plan development issues. I'm not sure that we prepared for how did we arrive at the assumptions in 2015. These are assumptions that were arrived at 7 years ago and approved by council for inclusion in the 2015 comprehensive plan then. And as a reminder, the county was not yet completely out of the Great Recession in terms of development at the time. So there are reasons why it might have been an undercount. Perhaps what's happening now is an overcount. Perhaps this is a unique time, and in 5 years, things will be much slower. I don't know. And I don't know that we have put together all the evidence of how the council came up with and approved 8 for the Vancouver UGA then. I don't recall, but perhaps I have forgotten the dispute about it. I don't recall that it was incredibly controversial then. And I don't recall how that compared to the assumptions that were in the comprehensive plan immediately prior, the one that was adopted in 2007. So that's.
Thank you, Chris. Are there
not
further
helpful,
questions
probably.
from council, or are you ready to vote?
I just have
thought I
one.
heard a voice, but I
Yes,
don't know who it was. Maybe it was my echo.
No, sorry. It's Councilor Olson, please. Just one.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Just to try to get to your question, and then let's get to a vote. But the process is what it is now. So if we look at what was happening at the time, to Chris's point, we were still coming out of the recession. There wasn't that much growth in Vancouver. So as we looked at the past, as we were building the VBLM at that time, it's the same process. So we got to 8 because that's what was reflected at the time. And clearly a lot's changed since 2015. And we're seeing that now with the data that we've collected for this particular report. So, and there was really no controversy at the time on the assumptions made for that VBLM.
Chair, I have
Are we
one
ready
final
to vote?
question.
Are there any objections in going forward?
I have one final question.
Go ahead, Councilor.
And then I'll be quiet. I'm just curious as to, because of the potential switch from assumption-based to achieved-based, is this the type of thing normally one would talk with the impacted cities, in this case Vancouver, Richfield, about before the council makes this type of change, or has that been done, or is it normally not done? I'm just curious.
Madam Chair. Councilor, we've already done it. They've already weighed in support of achieved densities.
We is you, Councillor Olson, or?
The cities have already weighed in, and it's Kathleen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they've both supported achieved densities as of the assumption.
Both
Yes, that's
being
my understanding as
Richfield
well.
and Vancouver, or what?
Yes.
So county staff has reached out to all the cities to obtain feedback on the report a couple of times. And Oliver, correct me if I'm wrong, but they all do support using actual achieved density, with the clear understanding, as council has mentioned, and Chris and staff, is that, you know, when the original assumptions were made, obviously it's not actually, you know, accurate, because nobody knew how the fluctuation was going to happen. So it is based on years ago, and this is, you know, acknowledging that, and then the next step of the VBLM process and the comp plan update.
You know, when I read the responses from the cities, they didn't all seem to address whether it should be achieved or assumed density. So I'm not clear that there was a response to that question. I don't even know if the question was asked. Was it, Oliver?
I don't think that the question was asked directly, but in their written and meetings that I have with the cities, they are in support of using achieved density, and I'm optimistic that they would testify to that if they showed up at your June 7th hearing. But I know that Richfield and again Vancouver have maintained that one of the issues that could come up is the disconnect between achieved density and assumed density. So if you leave that up to using assumed density and they're coming up much, much higher, I don't know what that will mean in terms of their own planning and going forward. But I agree that some of the written comment, I'm not sure that they have all come in and say, yeah, Battleground, I want to use achieved density, the center, but I know that privately they have said that that's what should happen. I'm anticipating that if they come up to testify, they will testify to that effect.
Oliver, wasn't Jeff Swanson part of the bill pack?
Yes.
And in that context, he was representing cities?
He was representing cities, and
and did they not discuss and vote in favor of using achieved density?
They did.
All right. So the cities did have involvement from the very beginning on this.
So
Thank you. That's all I wanted to make sure.
back to the question, are there further comments from council, or are we ready to vote? Hearing no further comments, the motion before us is to move to achieve density in the model. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 I believe I heard 3 voices. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The vote is 3-1 and therefore passes. Okay. We are in the throes of the vacant buildable lands model in general at this point. Are there any further comments from council?
Chair?
That's Councillor Lentz. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I do have others. And I would like to propose other changes moving forward so that on the 7th we can have something to vote on that is will better equip us to move forward. I have more, and I want to preface this with when the council majority voted some months ago to change assumptions going into the model. Some of those decisions, like the achieved versus assumed density decision that we just spent some time on, both potentially make our plan less defensible in future legal challenges, and also prevent us from getting an actual picture with the vacant buildable lands model. Some of the conversations that we have had extensively, and I know Councillor Rylander is newer to the conversations, so we can try to get you up to speed as quickly as we can, but some of that conversation was about what the purpose of the buildable lands model and report is, and its role in this moment of our comp planning process. A lot of the conversation has been about, if we say we have too much capacity now, then how will we be able to expand capacity later? And what we're doing now with the buildable lands model and report, or what we should be doing, is trying to get an accurate picture of where we are. There is time and specific places in the rest of the process where we can talk about how we project forward. By putting some of that future projection into the model for the vacant buildable lands now, the work's in the wrong place. It's cart, horses, it's things being just out of order of the way we should do them. So my next comment is related to that. One of the assumptions that was approved back in June was that approximately 21% of aggregate residential land would convert to schools and parks. Putting that assumption into the model is inappropriate on the timing level, as far as typically the how we factor in land for schools and parks happens later in the process. We've used the phrases, supply side and demand side, and the buildable lands model process that we're in the supply side, and we later talk about the demand and what we're going to need. That 21% is also not reflective. If we do want to put it in at this point, my feeling is that we shouldn't even put it in here. But if we do put it in at this point, we should be using accurate numbers of school and parkland that did convert. So again, similar to the conversation in the previous item, so that we are using real numbers, not assumed numbers that don't bear out in the data. So I don't have this as a motion yet, because I'd welcome conversation to, at least from my perspective, pick which direction to go, either to pull parks and lands assumptions out of this part of the process, or if we insist on putting them in, then let's give the direction to use accurate, real numbers of what did convert.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Olson.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been an issue for me from the beginning. I've been pretty vocal about this one. It certainly flies in the face of the data that we actually have in terms of parks and schools, and it's certainly not 21%. And we've never had it in the VBLM in the past. It's always come on the comp plan side. So I would, again, and I think in terms of the bill pack recommendations, this was not part of that either. I think if there's any data in these assumptions of this report if we're creating assumptions that is not supported by the data, I think we're making a mistake, and I think that exists here, as well as it did for the achieved density discussion. So if we're going to put a report forward and we're going to create assumptions on a vacant buildable lands model, I believe it should be based in accurate data. So I would support taking the parks and schools deduction out completely and taking it and putting it on the proper side, which is the comp plan update and the supply side.
Other comments from council?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor
and
Robin.
again, I hope you'll forbear as I learn and absorb information, but when I hear the word assumption, I also substitute the word projection or estimate looking forward. So if the target conversion of 21% of land to schools and parkland use is not accurate, why is it not accurate? Where did the number come from? But how would you separate it out from this process? Because wouldn't you leave a hole or a gap in the information that you're using to make decisions?
Councilor Rylander, I believe I understand what you're asking, and if I'm off base, just correct me. The reason that the number of 21% was put in, and it was separated schools and parks, is because there is knowledge that parks and schools are assuming the land where otherwise commercial or residential things could be built. We have seen that Parks has new vision for the county, and that will take land, and the land that they wish to use is identified, and it is not land that will be commercial. And the same thing is true with schools once they get through the planning process coming out of COVID. And they ask for additional time in a unique situation because of their inability to plan, not knowing how many people were going to stay virtual. But I think that is coming to a close. And so the process is finally moving through where it did at the time that these assumptions were put in place not that many months ago. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess, so what's the implication of pulling this out at this point? Does that mean that land which was in the assumption base planned or held aside now becomes potentially available for commercial or residential development? Or
Can I answer that? Is that something that I could jump in on?
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Counselor, and first of all, an assumption here, that's the word that's used in the statute and the WAC as well as in the report. It's not an estimate. I mean, in a sense it is, but it is one of the parameters. It's a definition of terms that tells the model how to operate. So that's, and if I'm wrong there, I'm sure Bob Poole can and will correct me. But I believe that is what we mean by assumption here. Now, how do we get at the assumptions? We are supposed to use evidence. We are supposed to use data. So the notion that there is a particular piece of land that is set aside for schools and parks because of this 21% assumption is not correct. The model and the report don't project what particular pieces of land will be. It's an overall look. And first of all, I would like to point out that this assumption applies, I think, only to residential land. It doesn't apply to commercial. And I think some of our evidence is that a lot of schools and park land, or at least some portion of it, might have come from commercial and industrial. But the answer to your question is the implication of pulling it out now is that instead a deduction in capacity for whatever kind of non-school and park development would occur at the comprehensive plan stage on the demand side. And that would occur when the county asks the districts, who do schools and parks development, how much land they expect to be using for those purposes. And then we can get an evidence-backed number for how much land to assume won't go into residential development. One of the other problems, as I understand it, with this overall assumption of 21% is that different districts and different jurisdictions develop at their schools and parks at very different times, very different time frames. So one district might have had a huge spate of development over a few years, whereas another district had none, but will need to do a lot soon. That is asked for. What are you going to do in the future at the time of the comprehensive plan where it is perhaps more accurate? So Oliver and Bob can doubtlessly state this more accurately than I did in terms of the techniques.
Councillor Rylander, you asked if this land would be available endlessly for commercial then or residential once it was taken out of the model, and it's the opposite. It is designated that it would be taken out for parks and schools so that it wouldn't be erroneously allocated for commercial land, which actually isn't available because it would be going for parks and schools. One of the problems with a application of a model becomes when there is land that it is thought is going to be available for commercial, but once it is checked out, that it is actually not available. And that we've been seeing for other reasons in the county now when developers have been sent away for lack of there being space and vacant land for them to develop on. And this is the same kind of thing, but as it pertains just to schools and parks.
So you're suggesting that removing this would be in the net a positive?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that it would take away land that we should be finding for commercial development, not this land, because this land is for schools and parks at the rate that they convert land. We don't want to take away the land for potential commercial development in the model, or then there truly is nothing left for them. We're already sending developers away, but we don't want to send away even more. The ones we tend to send away now are those that are looking for larger plots of land because we don't have that available in our buildable lands when we're out on the ground and we see what is convertible. But this is land that would be used for parks and schools and not for commercial.
If Bob Poole is present, perhaps he can tell us whether the information that GIS has demonstrates that approximately 21% of residential land has converted to schools and parks.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. This is Bob Poole. I work on the model and I've gone and looked at how much of the what has happened with schools and parks over the last 5 years, kind of that forecast to actuals. And as Chris suggested, the assumption was that 20% of the net residential land was going to convert to schools and parks. And what we found is less than half of that was converting. And the conversion wasn't really making sense. There wasn't really a good pattern. So we found that in Vancouver had more residential land developed than all of the other UGAs combined. And they actually had a net loss of school and park land because one of the schools sold off a bunch of land and they really didn't acquire any new parks. What we found was Camas added 90 acres of new parks, really a tremendous amount. If they hadn't done that, there'd really be no new schools and parks in this model. And this really points to what the suggestion is, that this be done at the demand side, where we can say, Camas, Vancouver, what are you going to do? Because these things aren't happening as, you know, if we say 20% of the land on 179th Street is not turning into schools and parks, right? It's not something that happens consistently with the development. So that's why it's on the demand side instead of the supply side. Right now, we really have it in both, because we put it in the demand side and now we've got it in our supply side as well. I hope that answers any questions.
So is there a staff recommendation?
Yes, the staff recommendation would be that this be left on the demand side and taken out of the supply side.
And Madam Chair, I would move that we remove the 21% aggregate residential land that will convert and go with the, for the clunky motion, go with staff recommendation that we pull this out of the VBLM and handle it on the demand side.
Second.
Is there discussion? I see this as a dismantling of the availability of land to build in Clark County. I find that to be quite devastating. So that's why my vote will be negative.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
Yeah, just following up on Bob's comments. First of all, the 21% is not reflective of what we actually see, and it's unpredictable, and it's adequately handled and managed on the demand side rather than double counting, having it on the demand side and having it on the supply side or the BBLM. So I think this is completely in context of supporting data and past practices that have appropriately accounted for parks and school land.
The problem with the data from 2019, 2020, 2021 is that it is skewed with COVID not building of schools. And so we know that to be the case. And that's why the numbers are as they are. And I think we know that. So is there any other comment or are we ready to vote?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilor.
So I will admit I am caught a little off guard in the depth of the material and understanding, and I still have reservations and concerns. I need to learn more. And rather than supporting this removal, if I have to default, I will default to voting no at this time until I can learn more to see if it makes sense. I'm just concerned about fully understanding the implications, and I'm not comfortable personally at this particular point.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
I'll just make this one. This is just a statement that'll be made that can be consistent throughout this conversation, that creating and developing and putting forward an accurate vacant buildable lands report and vacant buildable lands model is required by statute. And if we don't do that, this can and likely will be challenged. And it will be difficult to support it lawfully and legally if we don't follow the data and we don't follow what we're legally obligated to do.
Any further comments? Okay, we'll move to the vote. The motion is that the 21% conversion to schools and parks be removed and move to the demand side. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The vote is 2-2 and therefore does not pass. We're back to the vacant buildable lands model in general. Is there any further discussion? One of the things that I would like to bring up was that Oliver, in a memo that I believe was a draft memo that you had shared at one point, that there was a draft to remove the statement that by 2035, I believe it was, that there was adequate land already designated now. I can give you the exact wording on that, or maybe you have it before you, and substitute other language that was more accurate. And I would certainly support that. Let me see do you need that exact verbiage, or do you know the phrase that I'm talking about?
Councillor, I think I know the phrase that you're talking about. One of the findings or conclusions that we made in the executive summary is that there is sufficient land to accommodate the job numbers plan in the 2015 to 2035 planning horizon. And we also did make changes to that and was suggesting a different language to replace that conclusion, by also acknowledging that the population growth rate in Clark County since 2015 has exceeded the rate assumed by the 2015 to 2035 comp plan assumption, therefore, or thereby increasing potential need for employment land to account for the increase in employment needs to maintain the 1-to-1 ratio of job to household. One of the things that we wanted the council, and I can send this if all the other councillors don't have the language, I can email it to all of you, or the county manager could, is that there are other assumptions made, again, in the planning horizon, that in terms of employment, that there are public sector employment that will occur without actually needing lands. You know, we talked about schools, we talked about government employment in particular, which may not need additional land per se, and also redevelopment that is occurring. There is also a number assumed that land jobs will occur through redevelopment or employment on existing urban land or vacant office. So with those two numbers included, and what we are showing on the current available land, that there is indeed sufficient land to accommodate the remaining job numbers if you factor in this public sector additional land, additional job added through redevelopment. So we have a new language that we can we proposed, and that will replace the conclusion we reached in the executive session. So if all the councillors don't have that language, I will present it to you so you know exactly what we are recommending on how
If you would do that, and perhaps through Kathleen, that would be terrific, so that everybody has that, and then it could still be incorporated when we meet on this subject again, as I understand it.
I will. I will
Thank
send
you.
it to the county manager so it can become available to all the other councilors.
Thank you. Is there further discussion?
Chair?
Yes, was that Councilor Lentz?
Yes. Well, I do have other items that I'd like to talk about to help get our vacant buildable lands model and report more in shape to pass legal muster. I think that due to some members of the council having resistance to doing so, and then also Councilor Rylander, I know that this is a lot to take in. I would recommend I will hold on these because nobody's got that kind of time. But also, Councilor Rylander, perhaps it would be good if staff and legal counsel could help go through some of the most recent the nuances of some of the things we're talking about. And we will see where this goes at the hearing on June 7th.
Is there further discussion from council?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
Councilor
Councilor
Lentz,
Rylander.
if there are other specific items that you were going to bring up that you could share with perhaps the county manager to share with me so that I could use it as part of my ongoing education process, that would be appreciated.
100%. And a lot of these are things that have been discussed at great length over the last number of months. And I believe that staff is aware of the list of things that I would like to be talking about today. So they can definitely
If
share that
other
with you.
councilors could also be made aware, not just for the purpose of edification, but just for the purpose of knowing what your plans are, that would be terrific.
You bet.
Great. Thank you. Are there other comments relative to the VBLM?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
Thank you. Yeah, so agreed with Councilor Lentz. We don't have the kind of time it would take to actually review these staff recommendations and really get this model to where it's legally defensible, which is really unfortunate. So if we don't make some changes between now and or at hearing time, I will not be supporting this model. It's not a good product and not one that I would vote for. So maybe between now and the 7th hearing, Councilor Rylander, yeah, you can get with staff and be more comfortable with some of the recommendations that they've made. Otherwise, the council majority will go forward with the model and it'll be what it is. So
I would ask staff to tell us on June 7th, what if council didn't vote for the model? We are compelled to send forward a report to the state. And in theory, then that could not be done. Is that right? So I'm not asking for an answer right now, but I think that there should be clear consequences known by council should the vote be negative overall.
Madam Chair, I think that's an easy answer if Oliver's here, Chris. I mean, there's statutory deadlines and financial implications if we don't pass the model on time.
Yes, councillors, we will. I think the question is what direction will come out of the council if you vote on the recommendations as suggested by staff based on the work that our GIS manager Bob Poole have done to show actual what is actually occurring on the ground and what data could be supported.
Something has happened with the recording of the meeting. Should we stop for just a moment until that's fixed?
I think we're running now. It froze just for a second, but it looks like we're up and running
Okay.
now.
Great. So Oliver, please go ahead and complete your thought. We did not hear it all. And you're on mute.
Sorry.
Perfect.
What I'm saying, councillors, is that you've made a decision this morning to use a ship density, so that will be reflected in the report. The other assumptions, for example, you did not vote on putting the 21% school and parks on the demand side, so that is noted. Any other assumptions that the council wants to revisit and give us direction on, this is really the action there will be what the model will reflect and what the report will also reflect. Whatever direction the council gives us on the 7th, we will make those corrections as quickly as we can and produce a report that we will also share with council, that this is the report we are sending to the state. We have to meet that statutory deadline. If we don't meet that, which is June 30th, that's where we may have some issues, and Chris may jump on that. And I think what I have shared with council is that we have, I don't know, I don't have all the answers because this have never happened before, but I'm aware that if we don't meet our statutory deadline or submit our report as we are supposed to, would that constitute being out of compliance? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, but there are some risk. As I mentioned before, we have been informed by Commerce that Clark County may be available to receive $700,000 for the next plan update. We may not get that 700,000 all at once. It may be the first biannual and then the second biannual. If we don't meet our statutory deadline, will Commerce and the governor hold that? I don't know. I know in the past that when we're out of compliance, the county have really lost state funding. The councillors will recall that the county lost 10 million for Northeast 10th. So
Oliver, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think we can conclude this because it's perfectly logical that you wouldn't know the answer to the question of what are the consequences, because that's the reason that I suggested that we learn that at the June 7 hearing. And the reason for my asking that we do that is just because if there are thoughts by councilors, yes, I am going to vote against the model if, I think we need to know what those consequences in the aggregate would be. So we won't put you on the spot today. It is for June 7 that we will, okay?
Sounds good. And that will also, sorry, Councillor, that will also be a question for our legal counsel as well.
Yes,
as I said,
absolutely. Yes.
We will research that and come prepared on the June 7th.
Thank you so much. And let's move on to item 1.3, which is the 179th comp plan update option. Kathleen?
Yes, I can quickly share a summary, but of course, Oliver and Chris are here as well to provide updates. This is two parts. So one is, this is a follow-up to the 179th public hearing that we had a couple weeks ago, where we had a lot of testimony regarding the circulation plan on 179th. There will be an update on that process on June 8th, and I will say that the staff's looking at doing another public participation event in late July with the community. The question had come up, or discussion regarding that this is tied to the comp plan update for this year. The council has already reviewed and approved a lot of updates to the comp plan during this year, and those are on hold until all of the items come before council. So the recommendation is to remove the 179th circulation plan and that process from this year's comp plan update and put it on next year. That will allow the other updates to move forward with the ordinance that will be presented in front of council, I believe, in August. I have been informed by staff that this will not impact any of the financial or planning purposes for 179th. It's simply just to allow the other processes to move forward, and then we'll put this on next year's agenda. And I would open up to Chris and Oliver to chime in if I've missed anything this morning.
No, I don't have anything to add. The council is aware that they did approve. What we are really talking about, not continuing to hold up, is the 2021 annual reviews and docket. If the council recall, you did approve New Heights, George. You did approve 2 applications to amend the comp plan and the zoning from Rural 20 or Rural 10 to 5, the freeze, and I think I can't remember the name of the other application. And then the coordinated water system plan, we want to move those forward. Those applicants have been asking us what's the holdup, and we really would like to separate and keep 179 next year comp plan amendment and come to you with an adopting ordinance to help the approved applicants move forward on their actions that the council have already approved. So I think, Kathleen, you summarized it very well.
And you need no action from the council today, is that correct?
I will need to just make sure we have a majority that supports removing it from this year. I see 1, 2, and 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move to the Friends of the Columbia Gorge and Washougal Pit discussion. Kathleen?
Yes. So I'll just start off really quick. As a reminder, there was a request from the Friends of the Gorge to come present to council regarding the Washougal Pit Road dedication. And so I believe we have with us Nathan Baker and Brian Taligan, and my apologies if I didn't say your name accurately. So they will be sharing some information for the next 5 minutes, or the next 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, there'll be conversations and an opportunity to answer questions within that time frame. So I'll hand it over to the Friends of the Gorge, and you can go ahead.
And thank you. Regarding the time, Madam Chair, we reviewed the video from April 27th, the council time meeting. And Madam Chair, you said that Friends would be given the same time limitation that was given to the other side, to Jamie Housley. We went back and reviewed the amount of time that Mr. Housley spoke on January 26th, and it was 8 minutes and 43 seconds.
No, sir, I'm sorry. You're including the Q&A period in that. It was 1 minute that he used for his presentation, almost 1.0 exactly. So frankly, there had been discussion about using your time to be 1.0 minutes as well. We opted instead to kind of take the middle and put in the Q&A period there as well, because council dragged out the questions that were for Jamie and for Jamie Housley, and we won't drag them out with you. We'll keep them within that 5-minute period. So that's the reason, and I hope that you are able to go ahead and speak then.
Thank you. I think what we'll do is have Mr. Intelligent return on June 7th for the council regular public meeting and speak during that time.
Absolutely. You'll have your 3 minutes then, and as many of you as need to speak can.
Thank you. So for today, good morning, Chair Bowerman and members of the council. My name is Nathan Baker. I'm the senior staff attorney with Friends of the Columbia Gorge. And we are here to respond to a presentation given to the council on January 26th by an attorney representing a corporation called ZP Number 5 LLC, which I will call ZP. In that presentation, ZP made the unprecedented offer to deed or dedicate the proposed Washougal Pit mining haul route, also called Southeast 356th Avenue, over to Clark County. This road, located in the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, has been a private road for decades. ZP now proposes to transfer a majority of this private road over to Clark County in conjunction with its current land use application to start mining the site. In effect, the county would become the owner of ZP's mining haul route. ZP's proposal to give this road to Clark County is a Trojan horse loaded with problems. If the county were to accept the road, the county would be taking on numerous legal liabilities and unfunded costs that would come with it. We will briefly summarize a few of these problems. But first, one important piece of background information. During the January 26th presentation, ZP implied that the Washougal pit is a legally existing mining operation. That is not true. This has not been a legally existing mine for decades, as repeatedly confirmed and decided by the Clark County Community Development Department, the Gorge Commission, and the Clark County Superior Court. The mine was active, but without the required land use permits for about 3 years, starting in 2017. This illegal activity harmed the environment and made Clark County citizens' lives a living hell, especially from the excessive noise, massive dust clouds, and severe safety threats posed by the constant stream of double-loaded mining trucks 6 days per week. This illegal mining was ultimately shut down under the county's enforcement orders. ZP's attorney now seeks land use permits from the Clark County hearing examiner to resume mining at the site. Those proceedings have been on hold for the past year at ZP's request. Now, let's talk about some of the liabilities and costs that would come with this road. For starters, if the county accepts ownership, the county would become responsible immediately and in perpetuity for maintaining and repairing the road. There has been some talk of the mine operator reimbursing the county for some of these costs, but any reimbursements would only occur if and when the mining trucks are actually hauling. Otherwise, the county would be responsible for 100% of the costs. And based on the reimbursement dollar figures we have seen discussed for the adjacent Evergreen Highway, the county would be shortchanged for the inevitable damage to Southeast 356th Avenue as well. And here's another big problem. By offering this road to Clark County, ZP is asking the county to assume legal liability and financial responsibility for resolving 2 serious, long-standing land use violations within the right-of-way of this road. First, in the late 1990s, the mine owners illegally built a drainage ditch along the eastern edge of the road and used it to discharge millions of gallons of sediment-laden mining runoff into Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge and the salmon-bearing Gibbons Creek. Multiple agencies took enforcement action. Ultimately, the mine owners entered into a consent decree with the Gorge Commission in 1997. The consent decree is expressly binding on any current or future owner of the road, including any government entity. The consent decree requires the owner of the road to apply for after-the-fact land use review and approval of the illegally constructed drainage ditch. To this day, the owners have never obtained that required approval. The ditch is hydrologically connected to their mining operation, and they again illegally used it during their unpermitted mining in the late 2010s. The other unresolved violation involves an underground power line constructed in 2018 underneath and alongside the road. This was also a violation, as confirmed by the Clark County hearing examiner in 2018. At a minimum, these violations would need to be fully resolved before the county even thinks about taking ownership of the road. Otherwise, the county would become liable for resolving these violations after taking title. Another major problem is that ZP does not actually own 100% of the existing road surface, and the portions owned by ZP would not meet county road width standards in multiple locations. That has been confirmed in writing by Clark County Traffic Engineering Manager Rob Klug. At least 3 other landowners own small portions of the road surface in different places, ranging from about 30 to 40% of the road surface width. This poses a significant obstacle to the proposed dedication because ZP literally cannot give the county all of the existing road surface. And finally, it must be noted that Clark County has not ever done this before in recent memory. This was confirmed by Rob Klug in writing, and he said, quote, "We have not had any requests to date that I am aware of that have actually gone from private road to public road in the almost 20 years I have been with the county," end quote. Mr. Klug has raised several other specific concerns as well that we don't have time to cover this morning. And with that, I will conclude. And as I said, Brian Telligen will be back on June 7th to discuss noise issues and SEPA compliance.
Very good. Thank you. And I had my stopwatch running and it was very little over 5.0. So thank you for doing that. And we will see you again at the hearing.
And just to be clear, I wasn't referring to the hearing, but to just the open public comment.
Yes. I understand. Okay, at the open public comment. remember, open public comment is, as you well know, for something that is not on the agenda
Yes,
or
thank
not
you.
in public hearing at that time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for being here. And we now move to new business, and I show that there is none. Is that correct, Kathleen?
That is correct. Thank you.
And any counselor reports?
Yes, Chair.
I believe that sounds like Temple Lentz.
Yes,
Counselor
it
Lentz?
is. Council, just as our meetings were getting going this morning, I sent you an email with a requested proclamation for Ride Transit Week. And I understand that sending it to you at like 8:29, 8:30 a.m. Did not allow sufficient time for you to read it. It's Ride Transit Month. I think I might have just said week. Due to some issues on my end, I wasn't able to get it to you sooner. But it has been requested by Transportation Choices, which is a statewide active transportation group, and is also supported by and requested by CTRAN. The proclamation is Ride Transit Month, and it is encouraging folks to ride public transit and expressing the benefits of transit to the community. They would like it if this council wants to bring that proclamation forward. They'd love it for June, so potentially for the June 7th hearing. So my request, knowing that you have just received it, thank you for bringing it up, is if we, have a nod to generally move forward with it upon review, then perhaps council could review it independently, and we could utilize Lindsay to help us take any changes that individuals want to suggest and to circulate a potential final draft so that it could move forward for June 7th, since we don't have meetings next week.
Counselor Lentz, is this geared, I'm just glancing over the content now, is this geared for local data? Like, for example,
Yes.
the last whereas, is that local data or?
It is. It contains both. It has both state and local data in it. So in the last whereas, the investment in transit can yield is a general number. But that 100 million of investments within Clark County is reflected. That is a local investment number, and that second to last whereas really has the CTRAN's investment of over 100 million. That is specific to CTRAN, and also in the whereas just above that 2021 CTRAN's number of trips. So it's an integration of both state and local data.
Any questions from council?
One question,
Yes, go
I have
ahead,
not
Councilor
read it.
Rylander.
I guess my question is, what's the desired outcome? What's the intent of approving the proclamation? What's the benefit they're looking for?
To encourage people to ride public transit and to communicate the benefits of public transit to the larger community.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we'll look forward to discussion about this with Lindsay during the week then, correct?
Thank you.
And I don't know, Lindsay, are you on board at the moment?
I'm here. Yep. I can
Does that
I can put this into our form and send it out. And then you can circle back with any edits and changes that you want to make.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Are there any other councilor reports? Hearing none, there are no work session requests. Is that correct? Kathleen?
That is correct.
And Lindsay, is there policy update?
Yes, just one thing I wanted to touch base on. So I spoke to Josh earlier, and WASAC is putting together, they sent out an email to the LSC members, but I know that would have gone to Councilor Medvegi, and he's not here today. So they're putting together work groups over the interim to address a number of issues, one of which includes funding for public safety and juvenile detention. So on the public safety, seeking funding for trial court, indigent defense, seeking funding for Blake issues, the Blake case issues, and seeking funding for jail facilities and payments for inmates dropped off by Washington State Patrol. So they're requesting volunteers. If anybody wants to serve on these work groups. One of them is about general infrastructure. The other one's about kind of fiscal and governance, including the Public Records Act. But I especially wanted to flag the issue in terms of public safety funding for jail facilities. This is one where historically the legislature has not funded particular individual requests. But if WASAC were to come together and make it more of a general policy push for some amount of state funding for local jail facilities, that could benefit given what's currently going on in Clark County. So I wanted to raise that to see if anybody wanted to volunteer for these groups, or if you wanted to wait to discuss this with Councillor Medvedji, seeing how he is our LSC representative.
Your thoughts, Council? I'd say yes. Let's discuss it with Councillor Medvedji when
Okay,
he
I'll touch
is
base
back with us.
Thank you.
We're ready now to move into executive session. We will have just one meeting on potential litigation with counsel authorized by RCW 42.30.110, Section 1I. It will take about 10 minutes anticipated, and our attorney will be present with us. Will there be a report out at the end, Leslie?
There's no action. I don't believe there's any action today.
No action. So it is now 10:31. I would imagine that we will be back by 10:43 into council time for adjournment. But in the meantime, we'll be off this meeting and into executive session. Thank you.
Hello, the council is extending executive session for another 5 minutes and we'll be back at 10:48. Thank you.
I'm looking to see if we have a quorum, and I believe that we do. I see Councilors Lentz, Olson. Now I see Rylander and myself. So we have been, this is May 25, Wednesday. We had been in council time. We went to an executive session with council present. We discussed a matter of potential litigation, and there is no after action. So we are back in council time in order to achieve the one objective. It is time to adjourn. Thank you and see you later.